Friends, good evening. Oscar Wilde, again Oscar Wilde. I am a fan of Oscar Wilde. I love to read Oscar Wilde. And today, in my previous video, I told you about the nightingale and the rose. And today, my story from the Oscar Wilde is The Selfish Giant. It is the story of selfish giant. The giant had a big garden. Every afternoon, the children, as they were coming from their school, used to go and play in the giant's garden. It was a large and lovely garden with soft green grass here and there, and grass stood a beautiful flower like star, and there were 12 peach trees. Springtime broke out with the delicate blossoms of pink, and pearl in the autumn bore rich fruit. The birds sat on the trees and sang so swiftly that the children used to stop their games in order to listen to them. How happy we were, they used to say, and they cried to each other. One day, the giant came back. He had to visit his friend, the Cornish ogre, and he had stayed with him for several years. After the 7 years, he had to said that he had to say come and to visit his own castle. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in his garden. What are you doing, you people? He cried in a gruff voice, and the children ran away. My own garden is my own garden, said the giant. Anyone can understand it, and I will not allow anybody to play in it but myself. So he built a high wall all around it and put up a notice board on that. And in that notice board he had written, "Trespass will be prosecuted." He was very selfish giant. The poor children had a very dusty, had nowhere to play, and they tried to play dusty and full of hard stones, and they did not like it. They used to wander around the high walls when their lessons were over, and they talked about beautiful garden inside. How happy we were, they said to each other. Then the spring came, and all over the country there were little blossom and little birds. Only in the garden of selfish giant, it was still winter. The birds did not care to sing in it. There were no children, and the trees forgot to blossom. Once a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass, but when it saw the notice board, it was so sorry for the children that it slipped back into the ground again and went off to sleep. The only people who were pleased were the snow and the frost. Spring has forgotten the garden, they cried. So we live here all the year around. The snow covered up the grass, and with her great white cloak, and the first painted all the trees silver. Then they invited the north wind to stay with them, and he came. He was wrapped in furs, and he rode all the day about the garden and blew the chimney pots and down. It was a delightful spot. He said, "We must ask the hail on the visit." So the hail came every day, and for 3 hours they rattled on the roof of the castle. He broke most of the slates, and then he ran around. "I cannot understand why the spring is so late in coming," said the selfish giant. And as he sat at the window and looked out at his cold white garden, "I hope there will be a change in the weather." But the spring never came, nor the summer. The autumn gave golden fruit to every garden, but the giant garden, she gave none. "He's too selfish," she said. It was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow danced about through the trees. One morning, the giant was lying awake in bed when he heard some lovely music. It sounded so sweet to his ears as he thought it must be the king's musician passing by. It was really only a little linnet singing outside his window. But it was so long since he had heard birds sing in his garden that it seemed to him to the most beautiful music in the world. Then the hail stopped dancing over his head, and the north wind ceased roaring, and the delicious perfume came to him through the open casement. I believe the spring has come at last, said the giant, and he jumped out of bed and looked out. What did he see? He saw a most wonderful sight. Through a little hole in the wall, the children crept in. They were sitting in the branches of the trees. In every tree, he could see there was a little child, and the trees were so glad to have the children back again that they have covered themselves with blossoms, and they were waving their arms gently above the children. Had the birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers were looking up through the graying grass and was furthest corner of the garden, and in it standing a little boy. He was so small he could not go reached up to the branches of tree. He was wandering all around it, crying bitterly. The poor tree was still covered with frost and snow, and the north wind was blowing and roaring above it. Climb up, little boy, said the tree, and it bent its branches down as low as it could be, but the boy was too tiny, and the giant heart melted. And he looked out. How selfish I have been, he said. Now I know the spring would not come here. I will put the poor little boy on the top of the trees, then I will knock down the wall, and my garden shall be the children's playground forever and ever. He was really very sorry for what he had done. So what happened? So he crept downstairs, opened the front door quite softly, and went out to the garden. But when the children saw him, they were so frightened that they all ran away, and the garden became winter again. Only the little boy did not run, for his eyes were so full of tears that he did not see the giant coming. And the giant stole up behind him and took him gently in his hand and put him onto the tree. And the tree broke at once into blossoms, and the bird came and sang on it. And the little boy stretched out his two arms and flung them around the giant's neck and kissed him. And the other children, when they saw that the giant was not wicked any longer, came running back. With them came spring. It was your garden now, little children, said the giant, and he took a great axe, knocked down the wall. When the people were going to market at 12 o'clock, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long they played, and in the evening they came to the giant to bid him goodbye. But where is your little companion? He said. The boy I put into the tree. The giant loved him the best because he had kissed him. We don't know, answered the children. He has gone away. You must tell him to be sure and come tomorrow, said the giant. But the children said that they did not know where he lived, and he had never seen him before. And the giant felt very sad. Every afternoon, when the school was over, the children came and played with the giant. But the little boy whom the giant loved was never seen again. The giant was very kind to all children, yet he longed for his first little friend and often spoke to him. How would I like to see him, he used to say. Years went over, and the giant grew very old and feeble. He could not play about anymore. So he sat in a huge armchair and watched the children at their games and admired his garden. I have many beautiful flowers, he said. But the children are the most beautiful flowers of all. One winter morning, he looked out of his window as he was dressing. He did not hate winter now, for he knew that it was merely the spring asleep and the flowers were resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder, looked and looked. It certainly was a marvelous sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with lovely white blossom. Its branches were golden and silver fruit hung down from them, and underneath it stood the little boy he had loved. So what happened? Downstairs ran the giant and great joy, and out into the garden he hastened across the grass and came near to the children. And when he came quite close, his face grew red with anger, and he said, "Who had dared to warn thee?" For on the palms of the child's hand were the prints of 2 nails, and the prints of 2 nails were of the little feet. "Who had dared to warn thee?" cried the giant. "Tell me, and I may take my big sword and slay him." "Nay," answered the child, "but there are the wounds of love." "Who art thou?" said the giant, and a strange awe fell on him, and he kneeled before the little child. And the child smiled on the giant, and he said to him, "You let me play once in your garden. Today you shall come with me to my garden, which is paradise." And when the children ran into that afternoon, they found the giant lying dead under the tree, all covered with white blossom. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the beautiful story of the selfish giant, and this is this beautiful illustrated picture how the giant is lifting and playing with that little child. So I think this is the story of selfishness, and this is the story of how a giant later on realized that without children, without his garden was not bloom, not blossoms. Without children, the autumn remained throughout the year. Once he changed his policy and welcomed the children, again the spring started to come to his garden. The children started to play, and they feel very happy. So Oscar Wilde had written a very beautiful short story, the Selfish Giant. I hope when you will read it, you will enjoy it a lot. And this is very beautiful short story, The Selfish Giant. Thank you very much.